Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through the show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is Elyssa Kirkham, a personal finance writer who has spent 8 years covering everyday money topics like budgeting, debt, and saving money. She founded Brave Saver in January 2019 to write about the behavioral, mental, and emotional side of managing money. We talk about why Elyssa believes we need to make sure our content validates our audience members before we give them advice, why so many of us fail when we're rushing to give solutions, and the problems that it can create, and how Elyssa found her own voice with Brave Saver, and so much more. Let's dive right into my conversation with Elyssa Kirkham. Hey, Elyssa, welcome to the Plutus Awards Podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, excellent. I'm excited to dive into Brave Saver and all the posts that you've written. I think it's a really interesting take on personal finance. I think, and maybe you'll agree with me in that there are a lot more people talking about feelings around money and validating our audience's experiences with it. So I would really like to hear how you came to terms with your relationship with money and how that really led to the content that you have created with Brave Saver.
Yes, I would love to get into that. And I would love to talk about this because this kind of goes with a lot of this was happening at the time that I started Brave Saver. I started Brave Saver in January 2019, I believe. And I did that at the same time that I quit my full-time job and was freelancing full-time. And I wanted to start Brave Saver. I've been writing about money for a long time, and I felt like there were conversations that I wanted to have about money that I sometimes had a hard time convincing my editor or my client that this is something we should be talking about. And usually it was conversations that I felt like when we talk about money, we talk about it starting with a skill, like, okay, budgeting, or you sit down, you make your spreadsheet, you walk through the actual steps of setting a budget. But for me, I had this experience with a lot of advice, including personal finance advice, where I'd be like, how do I even get to the point where I'm ready to start a budget though? Or how do I even get to the point where I know how to do that? I know how to evaluate which budget system works for me. Or like another example is, let's say that I wanted to change my life and I found someone who outlined this like 90-minute morning routine. And I'm like, this is great. I'm going to try it. But I am not the kind of person who can get up before 7 a.m. Just can't do it. Not going to happen. So I was left with this like, okay, but how do I even wake up, early enough to have this routine in the morning? And I think that a lot of people who give advice do this, right? They're sharing what works for them. But sometimes we're missing these kind of peripheral skills and peripheral experiences that we're having, things we're working on in the background or that are personal, that really affect our ability to show up and execute. And that was totally my experience. Like, I struggled with budgeting for a long time. Part of it was that I got really uncomfortable when I looked at my budget, when I looked at my spending. Almost every time that I would like go to my bank account and open it and look at my transactions, it was the same experience. I would open it, I would look through, and I would be like, well, shouldn't have eaten out at lunch with my coworkers this day. Well, definitely spent too much at Sephora that time. That was dumb. It was always a negative experience. And it wasn't until I saw that and was able to recognize I have not had a good experience with my budget. And maybe I need to change that. Maybe I need to find a way to make this more positive, that I was able to change that. And so what I did instead was I thought about, okay, what am I trying to accomplish with my budget? What am I trying to make this do for me? Well, I want to not be so stressed about my money. Honestly, I want to think a lot less about my money. I don't want to have to think about it every day. And I want it to be realistic. I don't want to have to make a lot of lifestyle changes. I'm pretty comfortable. I feel like I'm already a pretty reasonable person when it comes to my spending. And so I started with that in mind. And so then it became clear, I just need to make a realistic budget that's not based on the assumption that I'm spending too much. That's not based on the assumption that I need to cut back or restrict. That's saying, hey, I actually am pretty comfortable with my spending. I just want to give myself these guidelines or these rails that I can stay within. And as long as I kind of hitting certain benchmarks, I know I'm going to hit my goals. And so that's what I did instead. And I also automated my finances as much as possible so that I wasn't having to look at my finances because, again, always a negative experience. So I don't have to look at my finances, and this is how I still budget. Honestly, I haven't really looked at my budget or reviewed it that closely since the beginning of the year. And I know things are getting a little hairy and I'm going to have to revisit that, but that's okay. I have a system set in place that matches my goals and what I want and makes sense for where I'm at as well.
So I'm interested in your thought process when you're creating blog posts or even coming up with ideas and how you have honored or even validated your audience's potential experiences with their money, kind of like how you did with budgeting.
I think what I really start with is I really start by putting myself in someone's shoes. I just start with really listening to people and hearing people, honestly believing them. The people who create personal finance content are usually pretty naturally good with money. It's not super hard for us. It's not always a struggle. It is something that clicks. It makes sense. And so I don't think we're always very good at taking the view of what would money be like if I had a background of poverty, or if I had a background of really intense emotional spending where I actually didn't feel like I could control my spending. What would it be like to have this or that experience? And I think that that's been really important to me, is really hearing people and believing when they say budgeting is painful to me or my debt feels terrifying, and really believing their experience and letting that sit with me. From there, I will think, okay, what can I offer? And I think it's really important to validate people's experiences and situations, because I think so often when we just rush in with solutions, we are really skipping over the pain. And I think when we rush in with solutions, what we're saying is like, oh, well, you just do X or you just do Y. And we're making it sound easy. We're really just glossing over this struggle, the messy middle where you're sitting with your stinky habits and you're kind of getting mad with yourself, or you're getting mad with money or your boss or whoever, whatever is going on in your situation. You're just sitting with all of these big emotions and not really knowing how to move forward. I think sometimes we skip over that part and we don't really hold someone's hand and help them walk through that. And I think validation can do that, because we say, hey, I see you and I see where you are and I understand it. You're not doing it wrong. This is not your fault. You're not bad with money, but you can get better, right? And I think there does need to be both. There needs to be I understand your situation. A lot of this is not your fault. A lot of this is you had good reasons for making the choices you did, or it made sense with your emotional logic. It made sense, really validating that. But then saying there is hope. There is a better way. There are things you can do. Even if you tried a bunch of ways of budgeting and nothing's worked, you can still find a system to manage your money that will work. So I think you need to have both. Because I think if we're not offering that validation and acknowledging the big feelings, maybe the circumstances outside of their control, maybe kind of some systemic obstacles that they might be facing, we really do run the risk of offering advice that can be internalized as, it's so easy, it's so simple, what's wrong? I'm doing it wrong, right? If money is as simple and easy, but I can't make it happen, then the answer is that I'm the problem. And I think that puts people in a place of like feeling a lot of shame, getting really stuck in their negative beliefs around money. And that's not a place of growth. That's not a place of being able to improve or move past. And so I think when we validate and hold space for those big feelings and that stress, it makes it more tolerable. And then it actually allows people to move past that. I'm not saying that we 100% have control over how people respond to or hear or listen to our advice, but I am saying if we're not taking a step back and really thinking through this, thinking through the emotional state that what we're saying could put someone in, then I think we do run the risk of maybe unintentionally saying something that could be really hard for someone to hear, or that they could hear as being shaming.
Why do you think so many content creators rush to the solutions?
So I think part of the reason that we want to offer solutions is that this is marketing. This is marketing, right? We want to speak to the pain. We want to say, you have this problem, I can help you. We want to show up and offer value so that people will buy from us, so that people will keep coming back to our site or our podcast. And that comes from a really good place. You know what I mean? That comes from a place of wanting to help someone. I don't think that's a bad thing. And the other thing is, a lot of times, though, that can make incentives weird, where we're only offering advice to the people who can make us money, or we're only offering advice that's tied to a product. And I think, again, then we're missing the whole person in front of us, the whole reader or member of our audience who needs our help. And so I think that's one reason that we often do that. And the other reason is that I think sometimes we're doing these things unconsciously and we're not super aware of them. You might have done a lot of work on your relationship with money, but you maybe can't sit there and put it into words because it's not been super conscious, or it was something that happened naturally over the course of a decade of you becoming an adult. So there's not like one moment, right? And for me, it wasn't either. There wasn't one moment where I was like, bam, my money relationship solved. I'm great with money now. I'm still working on it. It's still messy. It's still a hot, hot mess. But I think it takes a lot of skill and emotional intelligence to really be able to put into words, this is what was going on with me emotionally, mentally, behaviorally that was making it hard for me to change. And then the last thing is I think that it's hard to be vulnerable. It is scary. There are some things that I feel like I want to write about, but I still have not found the courage to do that, or I don't know how to do it, or it's hard to put it into words. And there have been things that I have published on Brave Saver that I published and said, this is really scary, and I feel a little embarrassed about what I'm sharing. And I do feel embarrassed because my finances are really messy, especially when I compare it to the image that I have in my head. Again, I understand this is not necessarily the reality, but in my head, I have this image of like how other money experts' finances look. And it is so much tidier, straightforward, and making sense than my finances are. I don't think that's super realistic, right? I don't think that's actually the case. I think I'm probably doing better than I think, but it is really hard sometimes to say things like, I haven't looked at my budget for 2 months. And that's just an honest fact. But it's weird to admit that out loud sometimes, right? Or to say things like, I don't really have a big overarching financial goal that I'm working towards right now. Just that does not make sense with me and where I'm at in life. So sometimes people will ask on Twitter, like, what's your big financial goal that you're working on? And I'm like, I'm just trying to file my taxes on time. I'm doing the bare minimum. That's where I'm at. So I do think it's really hard to be vulnerable and to open up about this. And I think that it includes sharing things that we're a little embarrassed about or still feel a little bit of shame about or feel like that was a mistake, I should have done better. But I think it's really important to also share that, because I think when you stand up and say, I messed up, or I did a scene, it wasn't pretty, but it still kind of worked, that we allow ourselves to be seen and we allow other people to see themselves in us also. We allow people to look at us and say, me too, exactly. And I think that having those examples of what it looks like to have messy finances that are still mostly functional is really helpful.
So tell me about one of these vulnerable posts, or one that you maybe published within the last few months that you felt, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing for me to even admit this.
So probably the one that I wrote and published at the beginning of the year, that one felt embarrassing. And I still feel this way because I went back and I reread it recently and I'm like, this is kind of dramatic. It's kind of dramatic. Let me explain what the post is about. So basically the post was exploring my feelings that I've had as the pandemic has progressed and I've had to make a lot of hard choices about my career and also my personal life. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. They're 4 and 7. And I really had to make a lot of hard choices and compromises and sacrifices since the pandemic began to kind of just like make things work and to have them add up. And I'm ticked about it. I'm not happy about a lot of the choices that I had to make. Some of it included like taking some unannounced and even one kind of more official break from posting on Brave Saver because it was really hard to show up to my computer, I don't know, hour a day that I had to work, and to feel like I don't even know what to say, and to feel pressure to post, but being like, it's just a blank slate. That was really hard. And so I had to take a look at it and say, I'm showing up every day and it's not working. What if I give myself permission to not show up? The result's going to be the same, but I'm going to feel better. So I did that. But that was really hard. And I felt angry about it because Brave Saver is important to me. And it's not something that I wanted to give up on. It's not an area where I wanted to make compromises. And yet I kind of had to. And I was really angry about that. And I was also very scared. I have a lot of fear that because I'm taking a step back, this is never going to work out, because I'm having to manage my energy so closely and not invest it where I want to, that these things are going to be set back a year. This very real feeling of like I've lost a year of my life or of my career. And I've had so much grief and anger about that in the past year. And that was kind of what I was writing about, was just that feeling. And then also the truth that comes after that feeling, which is I can be so mad about this and it can still be the right thing to do. I can be really upset about this thing that I know is the right thing to do, but it's still the right thing. Like taking a step back from Brave Saver did not feel good, but I knew that it enabled me to take care of myself and my mental and emotional health, so that hopefully when things get more back to normal, I'm not starting from zero, or I'm not even starting from a deficit, right? I'm not in the negatives. I haven't pushed myself into the ground and into it, trying to make everything add up. I have managed myself wisely and come out on the other side doing okay. And also that I've been able to manage my work commitments and my personal projects in such a way that they're not dying, they're not dead. They might be dying, but they're on life support. It's fine. That's the goal, is just like, if they survive to the other side in any form, I'm happy. And in the meantime, having the same goals with my personal life. If my relationship with myself is in a decent place, that's good. If my marriage is doing okay, that's really important to me. If my relationship with my kids has been okay, and, I'm not expecting them to come out of this completely unharmed. This has been a wild year for everybody. I think we're all going to have a lot to unpack on the other side. But if I make it through this with a good relationship with my kids, where I know that I am in a place where they trust me and they can come to me with concerns, they can come to me to talk about things, that's what I want, because I know that our relationship is what is going to enable me to continue showing up for them on the other side of this. So this is what the post is about. And like I said, I went back and I read it and I'm like, this is kind of dramatic, because I'm like, I hate it. It's so bad and awful. I don't want to be doing any of this. Yeah, here I am. And it is dramatic, but I think it's important to write in a dramatic way, because that is how big this feels to me. This is how dire this felt to me, especially when I was writing it. And I think people who read it and think you're being kind of dramatic, I'm like, oh, that's okay. This may not be for you. But the people who are in that place will read it and say, wow, I get it 100%. I feel just as strongly and deeply and fiercely as you do about this. And you are saying what I've heard. And that is something I try to do when I write my posts, is I don't usually try to write just from my own experience. It's usually something that I've thought about and I've tried to validate with other people that this is something that they're feeling too, whether that's my friends or people I'm talking with on social media. I try to think, is this something that's happening to more than just me that I can talk about and people can look at it and recognize, yeah, I feel that too.
So in terms of talking to other people on social media, are these social media friends? Are they followers? Like, who are they?
Yeah, so I would mostly say that I'm a big heavy Twitter user. And I definitely have made some really great friends on Twitter. I think that's also where I see people being the most honest and vulnerable. And maybe that's because some of them are anonymous, which is great, because I love my anonymous friends, because they'll just say it. It's great. Yeah, that's where I spend the most time. And I'm also having conversations about how hard it's been, how hard it's continued to be, what they're struggling with. Especially, I have my kind of Twitter mutuals who I know are in similar positions as me, where they're working to some extent, their parents or their moms, and they maybe have a personal project also that they're trying to manage. That's a lot. And so I kind of keep my eye on like, how are they doing? And I've had a couple of times where I posted something where I was feeling frustrated or honestly just complaining. And someone's reached out to me over text and been like, hey, I saw your tweet. Like, are you doing okay? And that's been really, really nice. Or DM'd me and said like, hey, I saw your tweet, like totally relate. Is there anything I can do? So I think it's been really great to find that online community and support. I think part of that also is because of how I show up on my blog and also how I show up on Twitter. People who tend to show up with the same energy, you tend to stick together or like get attracted to each other and form relationships. So that's been really fun.
That's really great to hear. I think Just speaking from personal experience, there's a lot of mixed reactions from using Twitter, but I'm glad that it's a positive experience for you. Now, when a lot of people start blogs or podcasts or even an online platform, they have the intention of potentially monetizing it one day. And so it sounds like your approach is you're not really rushing to offer a solution to someone intentionally. I don't think you have products in the horizon. I don't think you have any affiliate relationships just looking through Brave Saver. So I'm curious, do you have any plans to monetize? And if not, what is the goal of Brave Saver?
I think the goal of Brave Saver when I started it was to basically give a home to those things I wanted to say but couldn't convince an editor to let me write and publish on their site, which makes sense. You have your site, you have your outlet, it's doing your business goal thing. It's not there for me and what I have to say. So I was like, all right, well, I am going to make something that is there for me and what I have to say. And that was Brave Saver. And that was why I started it, was really because I felt like I really wanted to find my own voice again and find my own writing style and be able to show up as like my whole creative self, I guess, where a lot of times when I'm writing for clients, I'm writing SEO, I'm writing like studies and surveys, I'm writing stuff that's important information, but it's not necessarily like if I sat down with someone one-to-one, it's not what I would tell them, right? And so that's what I wanted. I wanted it to feel like if you and I sat down, I would be like, here's what I've been thinking about lately, and here's what I've come to, here's how I'm working through it. And so that's what Brave Saver was initially, that was my goal. And I feel like I've achieved that. I feel like I have built something that I'm proud of, and the other people have appreciated the voice that I brought to it. And I feel like, again, current goal is just getting through it in one piece. Like if I can just keep posting, that will be golden. I would love that. But I am thinking about it. And I do think eventually I would like to figure out a way to monetize it. But I don't really know. And I think that's a lot of what people have experienced this past year and what I've really been doing. I think a lot of us have had our work slow down. And when work slows down, you naturally have more time to think, to reflect, and you are going at a slower pace. So it's a little easier to pivot. And so I have been thinking about it. I guess I haven't been in a hurry to monetize because, one, I don't really know how to. That's a skill set I don't really have. Like I said, I show up, I turn in my work, people pay me for my words. I don't really need to worry about it beyond that. So one, it's not my skill set. But two, it's that I was afraid of kind of like messing with my alignment with Brave Saver. I didn't want to become so focused on writing the stuff that would make me money that I stopped writing the stuff that was really important to me. Because I do write for money. I do paid work. That's my paid work. And that's kind of my business model, I guess, is that I have my freelancing and my freelance writing with my clients. That's what I do to help pay the bills. And then Brave Saver is just a passion project for now. So I guess the easy answer is I don't know. And that feels weird to say. This is me being vulnerable right now and saying I don't really know what it looks like. I have some ideas. I can see some potentials, but I don't think I'm going to really be able to have a clear enough head to choose a direction until some time has passed and I have childcare again. And, I've really been able to restabilize my client work. Like there's some pieces that need to be in place before I can really jump into anything like that. But I am taking this time when I am slowed down to reflect, what about Brave Saver do I like? What message do I feel like is solidifying that I want to carry forward? What do I think I really have to offer that's different than maybe what other businesses or voices in the personal finance space have to offer? What do I enjoy doing? What's fun for me? So I am taking time to reflect and think about that. And there's a lot of faith, hope, and trust and pixie dust or something going on. My job right now is to get through this and trust that on the other side, opportunities are going to open up again. I do believe that. It's hard to hold on to that sometimes, but I think it'll happen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty. And I think speaking from personal experiences, I have been through that where I'm like, okay, I don't really know what I want. I don't know how to do this, and that's okay. And I think many business owners, including the listeners right now, probably can relate to that. So thank you for sharing. One last question is, I'm curious, I think we've kind of alluded to this about finding your own voice and that whole question of what do I have to offer? So if you can very quickly, I guess, summarize what you feel like you have to offer, whether it relates to Brave Saver or even some of the topics you've written that you feel are important? Like, what is it?
I think something that's important to pay attention to is what do you disagree with? What makes you mad? What are you like, that was a stupid thing to say or tweet or share? And what about it upsets you? And what would you say instead? And I think just noticing the differences, right? Noticing like, what do you think people should be changing? What needs to be different? And I think that's really what I did with Brave Saver was I had this feeling of like, why aren't people talking about this? Why aren't people talking about that? Or like, I think this is important to talk about, but I don't like the way they're talking about it. I feel like it's adding to the shame that a lot of people feel around money, or it's adding to the emotional baggage that they're already having to deal with. And so I really realized that for me, my voice is coming from a place of empathy and believing people. And that's a really big value for me because I don't believe that people are lazy. I just don't believe in laziness. I don't think it's a thing. I don't believe in making stupid money choices. I think that most of the time when we take a second look at people and how they're managing their money, maybe it's not logic, maybe it's kind of irrational, but there's a certain logic, right, that's driving their money behaviors that are giving them bad results. Or if we take a second look, then we can see that there's some very deep emotions at work. Maybe there's even some trauma informing their relationship with money, or a very strong formative experience. Or maybe they've tied things to their money that don't necessarily belong there. For me, my career and what I earn is very much tied closely with my sense of self-worth. And that made it really hard sometimes to make decisions that I knew were the right decision, but that were like financially not the right thing to do. So I think for me, it really is about having that empathetic imagination. When I think of that and I'm calling that in for myself when I sit down to write, I am like, what is the empathetic imagination? Like putting that at work and thinking about what would make this the case for someone and really being able to take different perspectives. And I do think that's something that comes naturally to me, maybe more so than for other people. But I still think it's a skill that can be learned and that's important to apply. But I think that's kind of what I did was I just reflected on what are the things that I'm always getting mad about. And it usually was advice that was shaming or oversimplistic or ignored barriers, and wasn't speaking to the stuff that came after. Like someone reads this and they're like, okay, but this and this and this. And I heard the this and this and this. And I wanted to speak to that, okay, but what if my income's low? Okay, but what if I'm supporting my elderly parents? Okay, but what if I'm disabled? And thinking through that, thinking about what situations might someone be in. And I try to write in that way. I try to write in a way where I acknowledge that this isn't going to be their best option for everybody. And where I try to give people like tools, questions, considerations that they can take on board themselves and really make a decision for themselves. And I think that understanding me and how I wanted to show up in these conversations about personal finance was really important also. I think some people like being an authority. That feels really comfortable to them. They like showing up and saying, I have the answers. And I think that's okay because I think there's a lot of people in potential audiences who also are really comfortable with that. They're very comfortable showing up and saying, okay, I have my marching orders. I'm going to go out and execute. But I realized that I didn't want to show up as an authority. I wanted to show up as someone who was kind of walking alongside people saying, hey, I'm in the messy middle too. It's not as messy as it was before, I've made a lot of progress in my finances, but I'm still figuring it out a lot day to day. And I wanted to walk alongside people and say like, hey, are you experiencing this? Because this has been messing with my finances lately. Or even if it's not something that I'm dealing with currently, I'm thinking back to a time that was a very real concern for me, or that I did have big feelings about a topic, whether it's credit or debt or saving money, and just thinking about that. So I think that was key is thinking about how do I want to show up? What do I feel like I have to give? What do I feel like, where do I see the holes? And even realizing that my point of view is being in the space where I can see these kind of gaps that I want to fill. That is my point of view. And it really just came down to, at some point, saying if there's something that I feel like needs to be said, if there's a message that I think needs to be out there, I can step into that space and fill it and be the person saying that. And in fact, I might be the only person who can do that because no one else is seeing what I'm seeing, and they're not seeing it in the way that I'm seeing it. And I know this might sound kind of vague and abstract, so apologies if that's the case. But I do think it just takes a lot of paying attention to yourself and what's going on in your own head and some introspection. And I did have tools that I used to help with this. I journaled, had a bout where I was doing meditation for a while. It's not become a habit, but it was helpful. I did it. I have friends who I talk to about my creative projects, and that's extremely helpful because I can just kind of blah, blah, blah at them. And they're like, okay, here, and they'll synthesize for me. Here's what I'm hearing, right? This is the main point that you have. So using those tools and that support that you might have is really helpful to getting closer to here's what I have to say. Here's where I want to exist in this space.
Thank you so much for that. So where can everyone find you online?
Okay, so you can find me obviously at bravesaver.com. I also have an Instagram account and a TikTok account, and that is at brave_saver. And then I'm on Twitter as at ElyssaJK.
Awesome. Again, Elyssa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you so much.
Let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with Elyssa. Lesson number 1 is it's okay to not know how you plan on monetizing your online platform, if at all. Now, I really appreciated Elyssa's perspective in that she doesn't really know what she plans on doing. She has some ideas, but her initial plan right now is to make sure that she finds her voice in the online world. And if you're just starting out, or if you've been blogging for a few years and you don't really plan on making money from that, that's okay. Think about what your mission is and your why for creating, whether it's a blog, a podcast, or even an Instagram profile. Lesson number 2 is to believe your audience members. What I mean by that is to cultivate empathy, to listen to them, and like Elyssa says, believe them. For her, she found Twitter was a really great way to act as a sounding board, to toss around ideas, and to see what people are talking about and even thinking about out loud. So whatever your platform is and wherever you hang out or your audience members hang out, go ahead and take a look at what they're saying or any of the questions that they're asking and use that to help you cultivate empathy when you're creating your content. Lesson number 3 is find your own voice by seeing what sparks an emotional reaction in you. So for Elyssa, when she was reading a lot of blogs, one of the questions that she started asking was, why aren't people talking about X or Y? And for her, that really led the direction in terms of what she wanted to do for Brave Saver. So if you are struggling to find your own way in the online world and figure out what you can do in terms of creating some unique content in the personal finance space, take a look at some of the things you're listening to, that you're reading, or you're even hearing from others, and see what kind of emotional reaction comes up. If you find that you're really passionate about something that people are asking about, maybe that's a really good indication that that's something that you should write about. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards Podcast. If you're interested in collaborating with other financial bloggers, podcasters, influencers, and more to chat about your work, interests, ask and answer questions, come join our Facebook community. Search for Plutus Community in the search bar or head to facebook.com/groups/Plutus Community. We hope to see you there and get a chance to support you and your amazing work.